You're listening to One Night Bloom, Book 3 of the Ash of the Veil series. We hope you enjoy your journey. Chapter 1, The Night. The car us. Steppes stretched endless under the midnight sky, a vast sea of bone-white dust where the wind whispered secrets of the devoured. No grass stirred here, only the ghosts of what once was. Oirat herds thundering across green waves, now silenced by ching blades and plague fires. Tonight, though, the air hummed with something older, something feral. The stars pressed low, their light fracturing into prisms that danced like fireflies drunk on eternity. At the heart of this desolation stood a single bloom, unnatural and immense, its fronds curling skyward like the fingers of a god reaching for absolution. Yelka Morozova knelt before it, her knees sinking into the cold earth, her breath fogging in ragged bursts. She was 19, her body a map of scars from plague stitches and midnight coaxings, her dark hair matted with sweat and steppe dust. The fern-flower, Kupalo's curse, Kostroma's shame, had nested inside her for months, fed by blood and seed, by the desperate unions that bound her to the last Oirat prince. Now, it stirred. A heat bloomed low in her belly, not the familiar ache of desire, but something sharper, like thorns pushing through flesh. "It's time," she whispered, her voice swallowed by the wind. Her hands pressed against her abdomen, feeling the flutter beneath her skin. Not a child, but a myth come alive. Petals, green and veined with silver, itched to unfurl. She had run from this moment across the hollow mare caravan, evading Zhao's death cavalry, birthing fern-eyed children in hidden villages. But the flower demanded its night, the one night a year when the veil thinned and the dead could taste the living. Kös Batar emerged from the shadows, his silhouette ablaze against the starlight. At 29, he was a ruin of a man, branded with Qing slave marks that crawled up his arms like black vines, his eyes the color of storm clouds over the Altai peaks. He had drunk blood to stay human, to keep the sun god's curse at bay, but tonight his lips were clean, stained only with the promise of her. He wore nothing but a hide cloak, his chest scarred from flayings and fights, muscles corded like the reins of ghost horses. "Yelka," he murmured, his voice a rumble of thunder in the quiet. He knelt beside her, his calloused hand cupping her face, thumb tracing the line of her jaw. The ancestors wait. They hunger. She leaned into his touch, her body already arching toward him, traitorous and alive. "Then feed them," she said, her words laced with defiance and need. Their eyes met, and in that gaze passed the weight of genocides and myths. The Oirat slaughtered in pits, the twins who drowned in incestuous shame. He was Kupalo reborn, she Kostroma's vessel, enemies turned lovers in the ashes. The first petal broke through her skin just below her navel, a sharp tear that drew blood in a thin rivulet. Yelka gasped, her back bowing as pain lanced through her like lightning. It was emerald, edged with crimson, unfurling slowly against the pale plain of her stomach. More followed, pushing from her ribs, her thighs, each emergence a bloom of agony that twisted into pleasure, her nerves alight with the flower's fire. Kös's breath hitched, his hand sliding down to press against the first petal, feeling its pulse sync with hers. "Beautiful," he growled, low and reverent. "You're blooming for them. For us." She clawed at his shoulders, pulling him closer, her lips crashing against his in a kiss that tasted of salt and starlight. His mouth was hot, demanding, tongue delving deep as if to drink the flower's essence from her throat. They fell together onto the dust, the immense fern overhead casting shadows that writhed like spirits in ecstasy. Yelka's cloak fell away, bearing her to the night, her skin a canvas of erupting petals, dozens now, tearing free from her breasts, her hips, each one weeping nectar that glowed faintly under the stars. Kös shed his own cloak, his body hard and unyielding against her softness. He trailed kisses down her neck, over the swell of her breast where a petal pierced like a lover's bite. His tongue lapped at the wound, drawing a moan from her that echoed across the steppe. "Let me in," he whispered against her skin, his hand parting her thighs, fingers finding the slick heat that had long been his domain. Yelka's hips bucked, the petals quivering with her movement. "Now," she demanded, her voice breaking on the edge of a scream. The pain was exquisite, each new bloom sending shocks of pleasure radiating from her core. She needed him inside her, to anchor the chaos, to pollinate the seed of resurrection. He positioned himself, the tip of him pressing against her entrance, teasing, tormenting. The ancestors' whispers grew louder in her mind. Names of the dead, Oirat shamans and warriors, mothers and children lost to Qing sabers. They called for life, for the flower's gift. Kös thrust forward, burying himself deep in one fluid motion, and Yelka cried out, her body clenching around him as petals burst in response along her inner thighs. The rhythm began, slow at first, a sacred pulse that matched the fern's sway overhead. Each thrust sent ripples through her, the petals vibrating like strings on a cosmic lute. Kös's hands gripped her hips, guiding her, his breath hot against her ear. "Feel them," he groaned. "The dead. They're stirring." And they were. As he drove into her, deeper, harder, the ground trembled faintly. Cracks spiderwebbed through the bone dust, and from the fissures rose vapors, ethereal mists that coalesced into forms. Shadows at first, then faces, translucent and ancient, their eyes hollow sockets filled with starlight. An old woman with braids of frost emerged first, her lips brushing Yelka's cheek where a petal had torn free. Yelka shuddered, the kiss cool as snowmelt, igniting sparks in her blood. "More," she gasped, her nails raking Kös's back, urging him on. He obliged, his pace quickening, hips snapping with a ferocity born of desperation. The ancestors multiplied, crawling from the earth like roots seeking sun. Warriors with empty chests, children with hands like wilted leaves. They gathered around the lovers, a circle of the resurrected, their touches ghostly yet insistent. A man's spectre, broad-shouldered and fierce, leaned in to kiss the wound on Yelka's shoulder, his lips tasting of iron and forgotten songs. Pleasure bloomed there, sinking with the building heat between her legs. Kös's thrusts grew erratic, his body slick with sweat, the slave marks on his arms seeming to writhe like living tattoos. "Yelka! Gods, you're pulling me under!" he panted, his hand sliding between them to circle the sensitive bud above where they joined. She arched, petals unfurling across her collarbone, the ecstasy coiling tighter. The ancestors' kisses multiplied. On her wrists, her calves, each one a benediction that drew moans from her throat. They whispered in Oirat tongues, words like bloom and return, their forms gaining solidity with every surge of Kös inside her. The steppe itself seemed to breathe, the immense fern pulsing in time with their union, its fronds releasing spores that glittered like diamonds in the air. Kös captured her mouth again, swallowing her cries as he angled deeper, hitting that spot that made stars explode behind her eyes. The petals on her skin quivered, some detaching to float upward, carried on the wind to mingle with the spores. Yelka felt the pollination, their passion seeding the dead, filling the hollows of the ancestors with life. A young girl's spirit pressed close, her kiss on Yelka's thigh soft as a sigh. And suddenly Yelka was there, flooding around Kös in a wave that shattered her. He followed with a roar, spilling into her, the heat of his release mingling with the flower's nectar. The ground heaved, and the ancestors solidified further, their skin knitting with faint green veins, eyes flickering with reborn fire. They knelt now, not as ghosts, but as echoes of flesh, their hands reaching out in gratitude and awe. But the night was not done. As Yelka trembled in the aftershocks, more petals erupted, this time from deeper wounds, the scars of old plagues, the bites of Qing whips. Kös withdrew only to flip her onto her hands and knees, the dust cool against her palms. The ancestors watched, their presence a chorus of silent encouragement. He entered her again from behind, slower this time, savoring the way her body yielded, petals brushing against his thighs like silken invitations. "Look at them," he commanded, his voice husky as he gathered her hair in his fist, tilting her head toward the circle. Yelka's eyes widened at the sight. Hundreds now, emerging from the snow-dusted earth, their forms weaving together like threads in a loom. Each kiss they placed on her skin, now on her back, her sides, sent fresh waves of pleasure coursing through her, building toward another peak. The ritual deepened, cosmic and unrelenting. Kös's hands snaked around to tease her once more, fingers slick with their mingled essence. Yelka pushed back against him, meeting every thrust, her body a conduit for the resurrection. The fern overhead bloomed wider, its light bathing them in verdant glow, illuminating the ancestors' faces, some weeping, some singing in languages that stirred the soul. An elder shaman, his beard frosted with eternity, kissed the curve of her spine, and Yelka shattered again, her cry an invocation that shook the stars. Kös buried himself to the hilt, his release a flood that nourished the soil, the ancestors drinking it in through the earth. More rose. Thousands, their numbers swelling like a tide, the steppe alive with the murmur of the reborn. They collapsed together, panting, entwined as the ancestors formed a living veil around them. Petals drifted from Yelka's skin, embedding in the ground, sprouting tiny ferns that promised the greening to come. Kös held her close, his lips against her temple. "It's begun," he whispered. "The nation stirs." But even in ecstasy, doubt flickered in Yelka's heart. The flower still bloomed within, demanding more. Zhao's shadow loomed on the horizon, the choice yet unmade. As the ancestors faded back into watchful mist, their kisses lingering like brands, she knew dawn would bring the true test. For now, though, in the heart of the night, they had pollinated the dead, and the world trembled on the edge of rebirth. The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of green shoots piercing bone dust. Yelka smiled through the pain, her hand finding Kös's, their fingers lacing as petals fell like rain. The veil thinned further, and in the distance a child's laughter echoed, fern-eyed alive, the first of many. Yet as the immense fern curled protectively overhead, Yelka felt the pull of the third path, the one that would cost them their humanity. The night bloomed on, ecstatic and eternal, but the choice waited with dawn's cruel light. Chapter 2. The Choice. The frost-glass palace loomed like a jagged crown of ice and iron over the frozen lake of Urumqi, its spires piercing the pre-dawn sky where stars still clung to the velvet dark. Built on the graves of drowned Oirat refugees, the lake was a mirror of death, smooth, unyielding, reflecting the pale glow of lanterns hung from the palace battlements. Beneath its surface lay the bones of thousands, their screams silenced by Qingdam's and winter's merciless grip. The air bit sharp, carrying the tang of frost and distant gunpowder, as if the earth itself remembered the genocide etched into its frozen veins. Yelka Morozova staggered across the ice, her bare feet numb against the cold that seeped through like accusations from the dead. Petals still clung to her skin, wilted and bloodied from the night's bloom on the steppe, their edges curling like dying flames. She had been torn from Kös's arms by Zhao's cavalry just as the ancestors faded into mist, dragged in chains through the bone-dust wastes to this underworld throne. Her body ached, not just from the flower's eruptions, but from the hollow ache of separation. The prince's touch lingering like a brand on her thighs, her breasts, her soul. Guards in lacquered armor flanked her, their pikes glinting under torchlight, faces impassive masks carved from the same cruelty that had salted Oirat princes. Ahead, on a dais of black obsidian hauled from the Altai depths, stood Colonel Zhao Wuying. He was a blade of a man, lean and precise, his silk robes embroidered with dragons that seemed to writhe in the lantern glow. At 40, his features were sharp as a saber's edge, high cheekbones, eyes like polished onyx, a mouth that curved in smiles promising empires or graves. In his hand, he toyed with a pouch of silk, heavy with the ears he collected from his victims, a Qing tradition turned personal trophy. But it was the figure chained at the dais' base that drew Yelka's gaze, a magnet of rage and fear. Kospata knelt on the ice, his wrists and ankles bound with irons forged in the palace forges, links etched with curses to bind spirits as much as flesh. His hide cloak was gone, torn away, leaving him bare to the cold save for the slave marks branding his chest, Qing ink that twisted like thorns across his skin. Blood trickled from a fresh cut on his lip, but his storm-cloud eyes burned with unyielding fire, fixed on her. "Yelka!" he rasped, voice rough as gravel under hooves. "Don't listen to the butcher." Zhao's laugh sliced the air, cold and melodic, like wind through bamboo. He stepped forward, his boots crunching on the frost, and gestured to the guards. They shoved Yelka to her knees beside Kös, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body despite the chill. "Listen to the dog bark, Fern Witch," Zhao said, his Mandarin accent smooth, laced with the condescension of victors. "He would have you bleed for ghosts. I offer you life, power, the empire at your feet." Yelka's breath fogged between them, her dark hair whipping in the gusts that moaned across the lake. The petals on her abdomen quivered, responding to Kös's proximity, as if the flower sensed its pollinator. She met Zhao's gaze, defiance coiling in her gut like the thorns that had birthed the bloom. "You've drowned rivers of my people," she spat, her voice steady despite the tremor in her limbs. "What makes you think I'd wear your chains as a crown?" The colonel circled them slowly, his pouch swinging like a pendulum. He stopped behind Kös, drawing a slender dagger from his sleeve, its blade etched with prayers to the Jade Emperor. With deliberate grace, he pressed the tip to the prince's throat, drawing a thin line of blood that froze almost instantly on the skin. Kös didn't flinch, but his jaw clenched, muscles rippling under the brands. "This one," Zhao murmured. "The last of the steppe wolves. I could end him now, watch his blood paint the ice like a winter rose. But you carry the fern-flower. The shaman's delusion that it will rebirth the dead. Let it wilt inside you, Yelka Morozova, and it dies with him. The Oirat stay buried. And you rise. Empress of the North, my consort, mother to a line untainted by barbarism." The words hung heavy, a temptation woven from silk and steel. Yelka's mind flashed to the steppe, the bone-dust churches, the plague pits where her father had stitched corpses until his hands bled. Power could mean villages saved, not just sewn back from ruin. No more running. No more midnight milkings that left her raw and yearning. But as she glanced at Kös, his eyes pleading not for mercy, but for her fire, she felt the flower's pulse quicken, a defiant rhythm against her ribs. The ancestors' kisses still ghosted her skin, whispers of languages lost to Qing flames. Wilting, it would damn them twice. Once to the grave, once to oblivion. "No," she whispered, then louder, her voice echoing off the palace walls. "I reject your empire. Your crown is forged from ears and ashes. The flower blooms for the forgotten, not your throne." Zhao's eyes narrowed, the dagger pressing deeper, a bead of blood welling crimson against the frost. "Foolish girl, then watch him die first." He nodded to the guards, who hauled Kös upright, dragging him toward a stake driven into the ice at the lake's edge. The chains rattled like bones in a gale, and Yelka lunged, only to be pinned by rough hands. Kös struggled, his body a storm of muscle and fury, but the irons held, biting into his flesh. They forced him against the stake, binding him spread-eagled, his chest heaving, the slave mark seeming to pulse with his rage. The frozen lake creaked beneath them, as if the drowned stirred in protest. Zhao approached Yelka again, his face a mask of calculated calm. Last chance. Let the flower die, or he shatters the ice with his screams. But Yelka's gaze locked on Kös, their eyes meeting across the short distance, a bridge of shared myths and midnight sins. The immense fern from the steppe, uprooted by the cavalry and transplanted here as a trophy, loomed nearby, its fronds chained to the dais like a captive god. Its petals glowed faintly, echoing the ones on her skin, and in that moment the third path unfurled in her mind, sharp as a petal's edge. Not wilting, not surrender, but union. Defiant under the bloom to force the resurrection here, in the heart of the Empire's frozen hell. With a surge of strength born from the flower's fire, Yelka twisted free from the guards, her elbow cracking against a jaw. She bolted toward Kös, the ice slick under her feet, petals shedding like blood in her wake. "Kös!" she cried, reaching him as alarms rang from the palace, gongs of iron and bone. He strained against the chains, his voice a growl. "Yelka, run!" "No." She pressed against him, her body molding to his, hands fumbling at the irons even as guards thundered behind. The cold bit, but his warmth seared, igniting the ache that had gnawed since their separation. Zhao's shout cut through. "Seize her!" But she ignored it, her fingers finding the lock, twisting with desperate precision, skills from stitching plague wounds, now turned to freedom. One wrist freed, then the other. Kös's arms wrapped around her, crushing her close, his mouth claiming hers in a kiss that tasted of blood and rebellion. "The third path," she gasped against his lips, her hands working the ankle chains. The fern overhead rustled, its chains groaning as if alive, spores drifting down like defiant snow. Freed, Kös swept her up, carrying her toward the fern's shadow, away from the advancing guards. Zhao drew his pistol, the flintlocks click ominous, but Yelka twisted in Kös's arms, her voice a command laced with the flower's power. "Bloom!" The petals on her skin flared, and the immense fern responded, its fronds lashing out, entangling the nearest soldiers in thorny vines that sprouted from the ice. They collapsed beneath the fern, the ground cracking as roots pushed through the frozen lake, ancestors stirring below, drawn by the night's echo. Kös laid her down on a bed of unfurling fronds, his body covering hers, shielding her from the chaos. Gunshots cracked, bullets whizzing past, but the fern's canopy thickened, petals weaving a veil. "Now," Yelka breathed, her legs parting, drawing him between them. The choice was consummation, here, under the Empire's gaze, to pollinate the dead in defiance, to rebirth the nation from the frozen heart of its killer. Kös's eyes darkened with hunger, his hardness pressing against her core, already slick with need. He entered her in one thrust, deep and claiming, wrenching a moan from her throat that drowned the shouts of guards. The petals on her thighs quivered, blooming anew with each slide of him inside her, pain twisting into ecstasy as thorns pricked and pleasured. "Yelka!" he groaned, his hips rocking, setting a rhythm that shook the ice. Her nails dug into his back, tracing the slave marks, drawing blood that mingled with her own. Around them the lake groaned, fissures spiderwebbing outward. From the cracks rose mists. Ancestors bolder now, their forms solidifying in the fern's light. A warrior's spectre emerged first, his hand brushing Yelka's shoulder as Kös drove deeper, the touch igniting sparks that clenched her around him. "They come!" Kös panted, his mouth on her neck, teeth grazing where a petal pierced. Zhao's voice roared from the dais. "Witch! Demon! I'll burn you both!" Flames erupted, torches hurled by guards, but the fern spores ignited in the air, a verdant fire that consumed the flames, turning them to harmless ash. Yelka arched, her body yielding to Kös's pace, faster now, urgent. Petals burst across her breasts, and ghostly lips found them, kisses from the dead that suckled the nectar, sending waves of pleasure crashing through her. She wrapped her legs around him, heels digging into his thighs, urging him on. The union was a weapon, each thrust a spell against the Empire. Kös's hand slid between them, fingers circling her clit, slick with their arousal, drawing gasps that mingled with the ancestors' murmurs, oirat chants rising like steam from the ice. More emerged. Mothers with babes in arms, shamans with eyes like polished jade, their touches a chorus on her skin, calves, wrists, the curve of her spine. The tension coiled, the world teetering. Zhao charged, saber drawn, but a root from the fern snared his ankle, yanking him down. His curse echoed as he struggled, the pouch of ears spilling across the ice like obscene jewels. Yelka's climax built, fueled by the defiance, the kisses, the prince buried to the hilt. "Together," she whispered, her hand in his hair, pulling him into a kiss as her body shattered. She came with a scream that cracked the lake wider, waves of ecstasy rippling outward, the ancestors solidifying, flesh knitting over bone, voices swelling in song. Kös followed, his roar a thunderclap, spilling into her, the seed pollinating not just her, but the earth. The fern bloomed fully, petals unfurling to blot the sky, and the ice heaved, green shoots piercing through, the drowned rising with gasps of reborn air. They clung together, panting, as the ancestors formed ranks around them. An army of the resurrected, eyes fern-bright, turning toward the palace. Zhao scrambled back, horror twisting his features, his empire's foundation crumbling under the greening tide. Yelka smiled through the aftershocks, her body entwined with Kös's, petals embedding in his skin, binding them as hybrids. The choice was made. The world didn't end. It began, defiant and blooming, from the frozen heart of death. Dawn crept over the horizon, painting the lake in gold, and the steppes' whisper carried on the wind. Life, from ashes and ecstasy. Chapter 3. Dawn After. The first light of dawn crept over the horizon like a hesitant lover, painting the edges of the frost-glass palace in hues of rose and gold. The frozen lake, once a tomb of silenced screams, now heaved with the breath of rebirth. Cracks spiderwebbed across its surface, not from cold, but from the insistent push of life. Green shoots piercing the ice like arrows from the underworld, their tips glistening with dew that tasted of forgotten rains. Yelka Morozova lay entwined with Kös Bartar beneath the immense fern, its canopy a living shield that had woven itself thicker through the night, petals interlocking like armored scales. The air hummed with the murmurs of the resurrected, their forms no longer spectral but solid, flesh warmed by the sun's tentative gaze. Yelka's body ached in the most exquisite ways, a tapestry of thorns and nectar woven into her skin. Petals had embedded deeper during their union, merging with her flesh until she could no longer tell where woman ended and flower began. Her breasts rose and fell with each breath, the delicate fronds there quivering as if sipping the dawn's light. Kös's weight pressed against her, his chest a map of scars and brands now overlaid with vein-like roots that pulsed in time with her heartbeat. His breath ghosted her neck, warm and ragged, carrying the scent of earth turned fertile. Moss and musk mingled with the salt of their shared release. She shifted slightly, feeling the slick remnants of him between her thighs, a reminder of the consummation that had shattered the veil. The ancestors encircled them still, a silent vigil of warriors, mothers, and shamans, their eyes fern-bright and reverent. One, an elder with braids like twisted vines, knelt nearby, her hand extended not in touch but in offering. A small bloom cupped in her palm, its pollen shimmering like stardust. Yelka reached out, fingers brushing the flower's edge, and a jolt passed through her, visions flickering, steps alive with herds, yurts ringing with song, a nation unbroken by Qing steel. "It's real," she whispered, her voice hoarse from screams of ecstasy and defiance. Kös stirred, his arm tightening around her waist, pulling her closer. His lips found the curve of her shoulder, pressing a kiss to a petal that bloomed fresh under his touch. "We made it real," he murmured, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through her bones. "You did, Yelka. Your choice. Your fire." But triumph laced with bitterness, for she felt the change in them both. The hybrid curse, eternal and entwined. Where her skin met his, bone lightened to petal-thin fragility, and flesh softened to verdant yield. They were fertile now, in ways that transcended children of blood. Every glance, every touch, could seed new life from the earth. Yet dying too, for the flower's bloom was one night only, its vitality a fleeting gift that would wilt them by degrees, petals shedding like memories into the wind. The fern rustled above, its roots delving deeper into the thawing lake, drawing up water that bubbled through fissures. Zhao's palace loomed in the distance, its spires cracked, guards fleeing as the ice shifted beneath the foundations. The colonel's roar had faded to silence, swallowed by the rising chorus of the reborn. Yelka pushed herself up on elbows, Kös rolling with her, their bodies reluctant to part. She gazed toward the steppe beyond, the Kar-Us expanse that had been bone dust and despair. Now, even from here, she saw the miracle unfolding. A green tide sweeping inward from the horizon, grasses unfurling like banners of victory. "Look," she breathed, pointing. Kös followed her gaze, his storm-cloud eyes widening. The transformation had begun overnight, as the myth promised. The fern-flower's magic, pollinated by their union, resurrecting not just souls, but the land itself. What had been cracked earth and bleached skeletons now swelled with vitality. Wildflowers erupting in clusters of crimson and indigo, their petals echoing the ones on her skin. Herds of spectral horses materialized from mist, solidifying into flesh, their manes flowing like rivers of midnight. They rose together, naked and unashamed, the cold no longer biting but caressing like a lover's sigh. Yelka's feet sank into the softening ice, now carpeted with moss that cushioned like velvet. Kös's hand enveloped hers, fingers interlacing, his calluses rough against her petal-softened palm. The ancestors parted for them, bowing heads in gratitude, their voices a susurrus of ancient tongues. Oirat words for home, for kin, for the sun that rose to greet them. As they stepped from the lake's edge onto the steppe proper, the full scope of the rebirth enveloped them. The air thickened with the scent of loam and bloom, pollen dancing on breezes that carried laughter, high, pure peals that cut through the dawn's hush. Yelka's heart stuttered, for there, amid a copse of newly sprouted birches, children played. Not ghosts, but living breaths of the nation, their eyes raven-dark with fern-green irises that gleamed like hidden jewels. A girl of perhaps 7 chased a boy half her age, her laughter bubbling in a language Yelka half remembered from her father's plague tales, words for wind child and star hoof, dialects scorched from the earth by Qing edicts. The boy tripped, tumbling into grass that cushioned his fall, and sprang up giggling, his small hands clutching a fistful of ferns that weren't there yesterday. More emerged from the undergrowth, a dozen, then 20, their clothes woven from fibers that seemed grown from the soil itself, simple tunics of bark and leaf adorned with beads of dew-hardened amber. One child, a toddler with braids tied in feathers, toddled toward Yelka, eyes wide with innocent awe. She extended a chubby hand, offering a pebble etched with runes that pulsed faintly. "Ada," the child said, the word meaning mother in the old tongue, a title not of blood, but of birther of worlds. Yelka knelt, accepting the gift, her throat tightening as tears pricked her eyes, petal tears, shimmering green. "Yes, little one," she replied in the same forgotten syllables, the language flowing from her lips like a river unchained. "I am. We are." Kös watched, his free hand resting on her shoulder, thumb tracing a thorn that had taken root there. Pride swelled in his chest, mingled with the ache of what they'd lost. Humanity's simple frailties, the promise of quiet deaths. These children were the first fruits of their sacrifice, pollinated not just by seed, but by the ancestors' kisses, the flower's bloom echoing through time. He saw in their eyes the Oirat unbroken, shaman's wisdom, warrior's fire, mother's unyielding love. Yet he knew the cost. These young lives would guard the steppe eternally, speaking languages that could summon storms or soothe them, but always tethered to the myth that birthed them. A boy approached Kös, no older than 10, his gaze steady as a Khan's. "Abba," he said. "Father," holding out a carved horse of bone that now sprouted tiny leaves from its flanks. Kös took it, the wood warm in his palm, and ruffled the child's hair, feeling roots stir beneath his own skin. "Ride well, son of the dawn," he murmured, the words heavy with the weight of lineages reclaimed. The boy beamed, darting back to his playmates, who now wove crowns of fresh blooms, singing chants that made the ground tremble with joy. Yelka stood, pulling Kös onward, their steps synchronized as they crested a low hill. From this vantage, the steppe unfolded like a lover's body. Curves of green valley, swells of blooming plain, distant mountains shedding their snowcaps in waterfalls that fed newborn streams. Birds wheeled overhead, not scavengers of bone, but harbingers of plenty, their calls weaving into the children's songs. The sun climbed higher, bathing them in warmth that seeped into their hybrid forms, petals unfurling to drink it in, bones lightening to carry the light further. But the bittersweet edge sharpened as they walked. Yelka felt the first wilting, a petal on her wrist curling at the edges, its color fading from vibrant emerald to ashen gray. She glanced at Kös, seeing the same in the frond along his jaw, brittle and ready to flake away. Their fertility was boundless now. With each step the earth responded, flowers blooming in their wake, small ferns sprouting where their shadows fell. Yet eternity meant cycles of bloom and decay, their bodies vessels for the nation's memory, dying a little each dusk to rise again at dawn. "Does it hurt?" she asked softly, her hand pressing to his chest, feeling the dual rhythm, heart and root. Kös paused, turning her to face him, the sunrise framing his features in aureate glow. His eyes, once shadowed by Kös, now held flecks of green, mirroring hers. He cupped her face, thumb brushing her lips, swollen still from their night's passions. "Only if we let it," he replied, voice thick with emotion. "The pain is the proof we lived, Yelka, that we loved beyond the veil." She leaned into him, their foreheads touching, breaths mingling in the space between. Memories flooded, the contract signed in blood, midnight milkings that blurred hate and hunger, flights across bone-dust wastes. The choice on the frozen lake, Zhao's chains breaking under the force of their union, ancestors rising to kiss wounds turned to wonders. Now, this, rebirth's dawn, a world greened from their ecstasy. But no crown, no empire, only each other, and the steppe that sang their names in wind and wave. The children's laughter swelled behind them, joined by adult voices, ancestors calling kin from the earth, families reuniting in embraces that shook the soil. Yelka pulled back, smiling through the sting of shedding petals. "Then let's walk into it," she said, lacing her fingers with his once more. "Fertile and fading together." Kös nodded, a fierce grin breaking across his face, the first unburdened since his princely fall. They turned toward the sun, its rays piercing the horizon like spears of promise. The steppe stretched endless before them, alive and aching with potential. As they stepped forward, hand in hand, petals drifted from their skin like confetti of myth, bones humming with the earth's pulse. Forever theirs, the nation bloomed. Forever dying, their love endured. Hybrids of ash and veil, walking into eternity's embrace. The sun crested fully, bathing the revived Karas in light that chased shadows from every crevice. Yelka felt a surge, her body responding, new buds forming where old ones fell. Kös's arm slipped around her waist, pulling her close as they walked, their hips brushing in a rhythm that echoed their midnight dances. The children followed at a distance, a joyful procession, their songs rising to greet the day. In the distance, the hollow mare caravan appeared, no longer hollow but filled with the reborn, wagons creaking under loads of fresh timber and woven reed. Madame Orlitza's voice carried on the wind, sharp and triumphant, directing the flow of life. Even Burke, the mute boy, rode ahead on a ghost horse turned flesh, his eyes wide with wonder, messages no longer sewn in skin, but spoken in gestures of hope. Yelka laughed, the sound free and full, as Kös spun her once, their bodies pressing in a dance step amid the grass. His mouth found hers. A kiss deep and lingering, tasting of dawn and desire. Tongues tangled, hands roamed, his over the curve of her hip, hers tracing the roots on his abdomen, rekindling the fire that had birthed this world. They broke apart, breathless, eyes locked in promise of nights to come, each bloom a resurrection, each wilt a deeper bond. The steppe whispered secrets to them now. Winds carrying tales of shamans who would teach the children, warriors forging spears from thorn and bone, lovers coupling under fern-lit skies to ensure the cycle. Yelka's womb, once the battlefield, now hummed with potential. Not one child, but legions, seeded in myth and memory. Kös's curse broken, yet transformed. He no longer drank blood, but shared life, his touch a pollinator's gift. As the sun climbed, they walked on, the hybrid pair at the heart of the greening tide. Bittersweet, yes. Their forms would fade and reform, an eternal dance of death and desire. But triumphant, for in their union, the genocide's ashes had flowered into eternity. The Oirat rose, languages revived on children's tongues, the veil lifted to reveal a world reborn. And so, into the sunrise they went, petal and bone, lovers and deities, forever walking the line between bloom and dust.